the show today. So today we've got Richard Davies. So Richard is the CEO of Platinum Property Partners, which is a property investment franchise. Now, Richard has an incredibly interesting story. He was actually mentored by billionaire John Hunt, who founded Foxtons, and Richard's had been all over the world. So he's been in Europe with property investments, and now he's back in the UK. So hope you really enjoy the story, and you're definitely going to get some really interesting insights from a CEO. Richard, thanks very much for joining us on the show today.
Hey Tim.
So first of all, like to get into a question straight away about leadership. So what is your definition of a leader?
That's an interesting question for me. For a lot of my life, I was more focused on making money than being a leader, and what that meant to me was basically making money in such a way that I didn't have to take ultimate responsibility.
Okay.
It was only about sort of 5 years ago, in 2015, 14-15, that I basically became the CEO of the property company that I'd built. Up until that point, I just considered it a relatively small business, and it's only at that point that I started considering really properly being a leader. What I mean by that is taking some responsibility. And then in 2017, basically, I merged that company with about another 20 companies into a group and became the group CEO. And that's only really when I started learning how to become a leader. And it's been a journey since that time. And
what would you say? Sorry. Keep
probably
going.
Probably one of the best examples that I can think of that really meant something to me was there's a story. And it was turned into a film. I think it had Mel Gibson in it. Basically, it was about the Vietnam War.
Okay.
The film is Once We Were Soldiers. It's basically about a lieutenant in the cavalry. And obviously, in those days, sort of in the Vietnam Army, they flew in by helicopter. And what really got me was basically that this leader, this lieutenant, was always made sure he was the first boot off the helicopter and the last boot on. Which meant that basically he was first in a battle and he was basically last off the battlefield. And I think that's probably, for me, the best example I can kind of give of what leadership means to me. It basically means leading from the front. It's about being courageous and basically showing the people that who are sitting behind you that you're there with them, among them, and basically that for me is probably the best example of leadership.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. Do you think using that example of being first in and last out in today's kind of world, where maybe not every company are all working in the same vicinity, there's been lots of hybrid work now with everything that's happened in the last year. Do you think that's quite? How would you manage that if you were a remote company?
What, manage what? Being the first
So
in?
Do you think it means, okay, so you get into work at 5 o'clock before anyone else and you leave at 11 o'clock, or is there a different way?
It's not about time. It's not about time. Or partly, time is just a function of basically a mindset. In the last year, yes, it's been difficult for everybody, but ultimately it's a decision and find that inner strength inside you, which basically says, yes, I'm responsible for all these people. You're responsible for your team, you're responsible for your customers, you're responsible for your suppliers, you're responsible for all your stakeholders as a leader, as a CEO. That's what it basically means. So you have to do whatever it takes, basically. You've got to find that strength. Otherwise you're in the wrong game.
Do you think it's more of a mental state of mind than it is actually physical? It's taking the responsibility in your own head to say, I'm, like you said, I'm responsible for all of these stakeholders, all of these people, and I'm going to take that on my shoulders.
Yes, and I named our group company after our sort of our defining values.
Mm.
So we have there's a core belief within our company. Our company is called CHX,
Yeah,
which stands for commitment, honor, and love. The X being the universal symbol of love we use these days.
yeah,
Our core belief is equality, that
okay,
everyone is equal fundamentally, and we could talk about what that kind of means, but
yeah,
fundamentally it means. But commitment is where the sort of is a core value, and that basically means doing what you say you're going to do,
mm.
fundamentally keeping your word.
Mm.
Even though the time that you actually said it, so the
Mm.
time you took the job as CEO and taking on that kind of role as a leader, you don't feel like being a leader anymore because you're scared. You don't have all the answers.
Mm.
But you have to find that's what commitment means. It's basically
Mm.
doing what you say you're going to do, and not hiding from it. And
Mm.
ultimately that permeates everything, every hour of every waking hour, and even the and it's been a few sleepless nights this year as well,
Yeah, I can
because
imagine.
no one has all the answers, especially the last year, but it's
Mm.
definitely been a test. And I think all leaders will know in the last year whether they were, how they accounted. Because
Mm.
what's really important is our own internal compass, and we know
Mm.
whether we're actually we we actually we we found the courage, and we basically did what we said we were going to do when we took the job. That's what leadership means.
Mm. I'm really interested in the core values that you mentioned there. Was that something that you decided yourself that I'm the CEO of this company, this is what's important to me, so these are my core beliefs, and I want that to project across the whole team? Because how many team members do you have roughly? Is it
So
around 50?
we've basically
I
got
know.
about 50 people. So we're
Mm.
just on this sort of, we're trying to stay under this sort of medium-sized
Yeah,
company
yeah.
level, which we're not going to be able to, we're not going to last much longer.
Mm.
We hide our numbers well because actually we have an awful lot of consultants and people who
Yeah.
work with us in both areas. Both we've got two divisions in our
Mm.
group. We have a media division and an investment division,
Yeah.
and we in both divisions we actually have a lot of people working for us who are not in that 50. They're consultants.
Okay.
But actually, also because we have a franchise operation, it means we have it's a national reach. We actually have
Mm.
closer to 1,000 people, which we need to worry about. Yeah, that's before we get
And
into suppliers
yeah,
and customers.
so it's a huge amount of people, isn't it, there? And they're representing the brand, aren't they? So when you said, okay, we're going to have these core beliefs, this is what the company's called, or this is the group company's name. Did you have that discussion with a leadership team or a consultant firm? How did you come to
I
say,
bounced it off a few
yeah,
people. I found
yeah,
that basically, but ultimately, I came up with it myself.
yeah,
And because I wanted to, as a leader, I think you have to basically say this is what we stand for,
yeah,
and then you need to articulate that vision. Basically, a CEO really has. I read a really interesting article
mm,
4 years ago when I basically decided to take on this CEO role. And I should point out, basically, before that, you'll know, Tim, that an endurance athlete. So I spend my commitment to myself was before that was flying around the world, running across deserts, all those
yeah,
sorts of things.
yeah,
And really, I kind of ticked those boxes, and I think I needed to tick those boxes, basically
mm,
personally, to kind of go, look, I've got nothing to prove to myself. Now I'm going to actually go and take responsibility in business, and that was a choice to become a CEO, because it was
mm,
for me an adventure, another
yeah,
endurance event, effectively.
mm,
And yeah, so for me, it was a case of, right, these are my values. I'm going to articulate them. And as I say, 4 years ago, I read this interesting article which basically explained how, in really succinctly, what CEO's job is. And it really came down to three things, basically. Build an awesome team, create an awesome vision, and never run out of money. Fundamentally, as long as a CEO does those three things. So the awesome vision, effectively, it didn't say awesome. That's my word, as you know. I kind of use it a lot. So so basically, ultimately, you need to come up with a really compelling vision, and that includes articulating the why of why we do things, and what's in our heart. And commitment, honor, love, fundamentally, was very, very clear. Do what you say you're going to do. Service before self, which is the honor, fundamentally. So we think about basically service before ourselves, which ties into things like sort of every day kind of making sure our reputation is more important than revenue. And X is love, because, and I like to say that love is the currency of life. Without it, literally, what is the point? And so fundamentally, commitment, honor, love. We have 5 guiding principles as well, kind of, which is a little bit more about the day-to-day kind of sort of stuff, and that's things like changing lives. So and think long term, and pay it forward, and go big or go home. Kind of those sorts of things, basically, which help us think on a daily basis. So whilst we have an attainment vision, we also have this value. I thought it was really important to create this value structure, so everyone understood the rules that we play by.
For a leader to understand, how, let's say he's got someone, they've got a young company, they're just starting out, they're building a team, they want to get that culture right. How do you so there's one way to articulate to members of staff, this is what my vision is. It's about commitment, it's about love, it's about honor. But it's easy to say those things, isn't it? But harder to get people to follow those. How do you go around building a team that believe in that stuff? That believe in the project.
As a leader, it comes back to this first boot off the chopper. Kind of ultimately, you've got to live it. If you don't live it, and as a leader, basically, the only thing that will determine a leader is basically the followers. And there's many different types of leaders, and but ultimately, one thing is true of all leaders, that they've got followers, otherwise they're not a leader. And it's very clear that followers will look and scrutinize what you say and what you do, and if they don't match, they won't believe, and they won't follow anymore. So it starts with you.
Have you been in any so let's go back to the start a little bit. Have you been in any companies where it's been a real struggle? There hasn't been an obvious compass of direction or values. Is this something that didn't really exist 20 years ago, 30 years ago when you were starting out in business, or has it always existed but maybe not has been expressed as much as what it does now with the internet?
I think there's been some really interesting thought leaders that have come out recently, which which weren't around before. People. My last company in the noughties, we were talking about Jack Welch's kind of approach to business, which was just I know is completely flawed now and that was all on the basis of shareholder supremacy and that's now. But I wasn't the CEO then, so fundamentally it wasn't so interesting to me. Simon Sinek, for example, is a great example. I think probably the best example. Warren Buffett for me is another of people who basically articulate very clearly the right way to do business. The question is, it's easy for people to kind of go, oh, Simon Sinek is great, fantastic, I really love his kind of writing, but there's another actually doing it. When it comes down to it, do you put reputation before revenue, or the other way around? And ultimately, that takes courage.
Yeah, definitely in tough times as well, doesn't it? You know, obviously we know each other, and you've actually said to me, you know, you recommended me to read the book, wasn't it, Simon Sinek, which is he
Infinite
spoke
Game.
about
I think I gave you the book. Yeah,
infinite game.
yeah.
And you know, one thing I think I said to you at the time was, and I'm sure a lot of young leaders will feel like this, is I read it and I was inspired, but I didn't. I still to this day, I'm not really sure what my why is. And I think you'll find a lot of young people, you know, younger people, maybe even, you know, every age, I'm sure, but they really struggle to understand. And how do you think, is there a way of getting that out of yourself, or is it just, it will come to you when you're ready to know what it is?
It will come to you when you're ready. If you if you keep trying. You know,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people kind of expect to read a book and just kind of bang, they just get
yeah,
it, right?
mm,
I mean, I'll bring a lot of things back to running. You know,
mm,
I switched to running from endurance biking 5 or 6 years ago, and it's been a journey where I've learned you can't just basically. There was there was no quick route to get to where I've sort of got to in my appreciation of my running.
mm,
And I found it a very spiritual kind of process. You just have to
mm,
go through it. You have to go and do all the races and all the things and all the training, running in the mud and kind of and going through that whole process to get to a place where you would be able to see running the way I see it.
mm,
And you couldn't get there from doing so park runs. Not that you got any problem with I got any problem with park runs. So the point is, I think you have to experience and try and understand, and it takes time. It takes experience. It just takes it takes being involved
yeah,
and time
mm,
to find it in your heart, basically. And I'm 51, right? So basically, and I've seen quite a lot of life. So basically, for someone who is a lot younger, like you, Tim, basically,
mm,
for you to, don't feel disappointed if you read a book and kind of go, I just don't think I've kind of
yeah.
understood the profound nature of this.
Mm.
But you will do.
I think it's almost um, I think there's a common trait, and you can tell me if I'm right on this, but to get to especially a CEO of a company of a large, you know, decent sized organization, or be the CEO of a few people, you've got to have a sense of urgency about you and impatience to almost want to do that, you know? So I found that, you know, a lot of leaders that I spoke to, they all are pretty impatient. Um, so it's quite, you know, for them to say, you know, you've got to find that patience within yourself to understand what your why is. It's hard, isn't it? Because it goes against your natural tendency of being really an impatient person that wants to get stuff done. Do you think that comes a bit with age as well, or maybe experience, that you have to learn that you need to be
I'm
more
very
patient?
impatient. But there again, I have a 100-year plan.
Yeah.
So am I patient or impatient? I think I'm both. Each day I wake up and I want to achieve. I want to
Mm,
push this organization forward.
mm,
And what I mean by that is I want to improve the value exchange with of all our stakeholders.
yeah.
And I do that through leadership, through creating ideas, and there is a real urgency to all of those things.
Mm,
But I see it in the context of the long term. I think probably the biggest issue I see with failed businesses and or it is that they think too short term. So they get the impatience,
mm,
but they don't have the long term plan.
mm,
And if you look at things with a short-term point of view, you will come to different conclusions than if you look at a problem with a long-term point of view. Yeah. So if you focus on the short term, you will, despite all your best efforts and all your energy, you are likely to fail.
What do you describe, Richard, as short term? Because you just mentioned 100-year plan. A lot of people listening to this will probably smile and think that is extremely long term. So where's two questions? What do you think is short term? Because that might be completely different to what some of our listeners are thinking right now. And also, could you elaborate more about the 100-year plan as well?
So fundamentally, we have three types of focus really: short term, medium term, and long term.
Yeah.
And short term is the sort of next quarter, and those are the key things, that milestones that we want to achieve. And we always kind of look at the top three from each business sector. We've got quite a few different businesses, so it does get quite complicated. But we look at the most important things that we want to achieve in the next quarter, the most important things we want to achieve in the next year to 18 months, that sort of medium term. Long term is all 5 years plus. Yeah. But it can be 10, 12, 20 years. I think it's easier to look forward further as you get older. And someone once said to me, you can only look forward as far as you can look back. Yeah. So as I get older, I may well, by nature, be able to kind of look further forward. I think I think it's important to give context, to look at the long term. Begin with the end in mind. I think that's out of a book, The 7 Habits or...
Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey.
So begin with the end in mind, thinking sort of with a very long-term approach. And we take a vote, and it depends what type of business you're in, because in our media business, we're looking at products that basically might have a sort of 5-year life cycle, basically. And it's as far as we can look. In our investment business, where we buy buildings and stuff, we're looking... we're looking with a 2050 plan. So we don't buy things that we don't want to own in the year 2050. Okay. The 100-year plan is something slightly different. I would have to be 151 to basically survive that. But that's a continual 100-year plan that we basically, so it's not a fixed date. So next year it's still a 100-year plan. And so it's a long focal point. And where that helps us is we're creating an EOC process, which is an employee-owned company.
Okay, yeah.
And we look at how we want to transfer control and earnings and rewards over a period of time. So the 100 years makes it really, really useful, because we're assuming that everyone who works for the company right now is not going to be working for it in 100 years' time, but we need to be able to reward those people that are working in 100 years.
Okay, that makes complete sense. Yeah. Why is that? That's an interesting way of looking at things, especially with the employee-owned, company. Why is that something that you guys are interested in or looking to do?
Because it's not the usual. It's an age thing again, Tim. Basically, kind of. I mean, at where I am is I've always had all the money that I've ever needed. I've had the cars, I've had the big houses, the boats, and I've done all that. For me, it's much more about kind of finding meaning. Finding meaning for me is actually knowing we're creating something that isn't just going to last for a few years and just basically fall over. I get excited about that long-term element. I wouldn't. If literally you took that away and basically said, look, Richard, you can have all the money and everything like that, all the money, I would literally disappear tomorrow back to my mountains or deserts or whatever. It's that long-term thinking that basically drives me now.
Yeah, no, it's super, super interesting. good for the team as well, because it gives them, I suppose, it incentivizes the team, doesn't it, to want it to really feel part of something as well. If that's, it's quite common in America, isn't it, that people get stock options and whatnot going into companies, but it's do you think that by doing that, would you advise someone who was starting a company or someone who had a company that they were looking to scale to find a way to reward their team that way, in terms of giving them actual equity potentially in the business? Or
Okay, so there's loads of different ways of doing it. My main business mentor was a guy called John Hunt who built Foxtons.
yeah.
And he was very averse to giving shares away. He owned the whole company, and he paid well. Basically, his approach, and that absolutely worked for John. And he built a fantastic company. He did look after people. He's a great guy. For me, it's safe to say I'm much less financially motivated than John. I am
Yeah.
very commercial. We've got some very large financial goals, but I've long since reached a level of financial security that any more basically doesn't really kind of make any difference
To your lifestyle.
yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, I'd like to create security for the people that I work with, and one of the
Yeah.
reasons the love in our name is I only want to work with people that I love.
Yeah. Okay.
And why wouldn't you want to look after the people that you love? So fundamentally, it's a different approach. You can pick your. Neither one is right or wrong. I'm not saying what we're doing is just is the right way. It's certainly the right way for me, and I believe it builds long-term relationships, which I enjoy.
Absolutely makes sense. Going back to, obviously you talked about Sir John Hunt, Foxtons. Going back, was that your first role? Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in property, or what was your very first job actually, where you earned some money?
my very first job was when I was 16. I sort of grew up from in a sort of fairly low income family.
Yeah.
So I sort of had a work ethic from a young age. But I can remember odd jobs where I was quite entrepreneurial, where I'd always go and sort of collect bottles and return them for 1p
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
I did all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Did all the paper rounds. The sort of first job, funny enough, the first job worth mentioning is probably when I worked for Bournemouth Council.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I kind of worked for. They gave me the lowest of the low job when I was 16, 17 or whatever, and they made me wash up. I was a washer upper, and they thought, wow, this guy is actually kind of destined for good stuff. So basically, they put me on in this hamburger grill on Bournemouth Beach in the middle of the summer, and basically it was like a big fiberglass hamburger with a hot plate.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, right, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to sell more hamburgers than anybody else, and so they'll kind of get me off this job because it's horrendous.
Yeah. Okay.
And I outsold everyone else basically, and the management basically said, "Yeah, he's really good at that. Right, let's just keep him there." Basically, he can. And I was like, "Oh, I shot myself in the foot." Yeah.
How did you sorry? Yeah. How did you sell more hamburgers than anyone else?
More focused.
Effort? More focused? More effort?
Yeah, focused, yeah. And I kind of got into it. I really kind of got into the kind of job, although it was horrendous. Imagine being over a hot plate in a
hot, yeah.
It was it was not a pleasant job. And I got into property basically kind of by choosing to go into real estate. I always say to people, you should never go and answer an advert. I looked in. I was in London. I kind of realised I wanted to go into real estate. I'd sort of had. I'd left it late to kind of choose a career.
How old were you
I was
around that
about
time?
24 at that time.
Okay. And why did you move to London? Was it just,
I was in
bright
London,
lights?
bright lights, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
loved it, and I had a lot of fun basically up until that point. But realised I needed to kind of do something,
Mm.
and then I kind of looked at all the estate agents in London, realised that I couldn't go to. I was left it too late to go to university, kind of go and study and become a
Mm.
surveyor, which is what my two sons have done. Actually, they've both gone through the same course at Oxford Brookes and become
Yeah.
commercially trained property people. I
Mm.
didn't have that, so I had to go for an estate agency job, and I whittled all the agents in London down basically to top three, and I phoned them up and I said, right, this is what I've done. You're in my top three. It's between you and two other companies, and they were
Yeah.
like, "Who is this guy?" Right? I'm like, I need to come and interview you to figure out whether you're the one I want to work for. And
Yeah.
again, they were like, "Okay." And I ended up kind of having about 3 interviews with John, and basically he wasn't quite sure because I didn't shave then, and he didn't like beards. He never employed
Okay.
someone with a beard. But anyway, I basically I chose to work with John, which was a great move. I wasn't strictly an estate agent. I basically set up what was effectively in London at the time was Airbnb now,
Yeah.
where we took
Okay.
apartments and basically let them out on short term, and
Mm.
it was a real winner. That company, that part of the business went crazy.
How did you find, I mean, to tell someone right now to phone up, if we had 18-year-old, John looking to get into property, and you said find the three companies and call them up. I mean, that would be pretty daunting for most people. Where did you get that inner confidence from, or borderline arrogance potentially? Some people might say, but I think it was confidence. Where did you get that confidence from to go? Do you know what? This is how I'm gonna do things.
It was a commitment to myself. Basically, I just made it. I made the decision that that was actually what I needed to do, and I just said, right, Richard, that's what you're going to do, and
Because that,
and
yeah.
it comes back to doing what you know you need to do.
Do you get that's incredibly, pretty innovative, isn't there? Because when you talk to people about getting jobs nowadays, you're trying to be different, aren't you? Did that just come naturally to you? You thought differently to maybe most people in the way you
Probably.
approach things?
Yes. Yeah, I'm kind of. Look, I've never been sort of diagnosed, but I've definitely got some kind of spectrum. I'm on some kind of spectrum.
Mm.
Maybe that helps. I don't know. But I realised at the time it was just like, look, I wanted to work for the right company, and the only way I'm
Yeah.
going to do this is basically just do a bit of base. It wasn't that difficult. It was just do a bit of basic research as to which
Mm.
agents basically I like the look of.
Mm.
Do a little bit of research. This is before websites and stuff like that. Going in
Mm.
there and just having a sort of sense of, okay, and just seeing how they're growing and just get a real instinct which are the top three, and then
Mm.
phone them up and just say and talk to them
Yeah.
and say seriously,
Action.
this is what I've done. There's 100 companies. I wish you're in the top three. Congratulations.
Yeah. It's a great story. How big were Foxtons at that point? Because if
Small,
John, they must have been, mustn't they?
really small, really small.
So what, a couple of branches or?
Yeah, I think they had about sort of 3 or 4 offices at that stage, and we, very very small in terms of the sales team, which was about 80% of the kind of the staff.
Mm.
You could get them in a small room.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were the right. It was definitely the right company, and John was definitely the right person. More importantly, was the right person to work with. He was a truly incredible individual.
What characteristics made, if you look back now could you sort of prize out any of those characteristics about him that made him such a great leader?
Well, anyone who goes from zero to a self-made billionaire basically has got something about them. But he just had a drive and inner strength as well. He was a strong, mentally strong man.
Do you think that meant to say, was he incredibly focused as well? On did he have a goal and it
One
was
hundred percent.
he's getting there?
100%. Yeah. I mean, basically, the commitment on love. John had those in spades. Although John would basically say, well, he was 100% committed. That's for sure, right? To everything he kind of did. He was a very honourable man. People who negotiated would probably say that he wasn't, but actually he was just tough.
Yeah.
But he was 100% honourable. And he loved his team. He loves his staff. I've kept in contact with him, and he denies that he kind of cares about people that as much as I think he does. But he doesn't want to seem too soft. But basically, yeah, he was a good man.
That's really, really interesting. And where did it say when you kind of started to grow that side of the business for Foxtons? Where did that lead you on your career path? 'Cause I know you started to go to Europe at some point in your career.
Very quickly, I was only really at Foxtons for a couple of years. I went there for a purpose, to basically learn about real estate, and I did. I was right there, front line, and ultimately picked the timing right, because any idiot could make money in residential property in central London or in the late 90s. And I was that idiot who basically, and who had a lot of drive. I went out and bought a load of assets and a load of flats, did them up, and did lots of trades. There were loads of people at that time, because the early 90s has been such a tough time for real estate investment.
Yeah.
There was a load of people who bought load of portfolios, and it was only until before about 96 when people started to be able to sell. The market kind of opened up
a bit. Yeah.
So actually, people were very keen on selling these kind of investments, and the prices were ridiculously low. My biggest, and I made enough money in the sort of second half of the 90s to effectively. It sounds crazy at the time, but effectively retired when I was 30. And I sort of effectively just went flying around the world and had some good times for another 3 years before I actually got to the point where I realised I was far too young to retire, and I needed to do something. Otherwise, my brain cells were gonna disappear.
What was the because I remember 96 was the absolute, I think when you look back at property prices stuff, 96 was right at the bottom of the market, and I know interest rates were incredibly high, weren't they, before that, which put a lot of people out of business. So yeah, interesting side note. So did you, when you retired at 30, so you went and had some more fun for a few years, then you thought to yourself, I need to get my mind going again. I need to get focused on something. Probably that Are you quite a competitive person?
With myself.
With your,
Yeah.
Not with other people. Not with. Was it always that way?
Much more with myself than anyone else. Yeah.
And has it always been that way since?
Yes.
Since you can remember.
Yeah. I used to race. I was a sportsman from a young age, so I was a very competitive swimmer in my teens.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was about beating other people, but over the years it's been much more about me living my own life. I've had quite a very interesting, eventful life. Travelled a lot ever since I was 16. I sort of used to get on planes and go on my adventures. I still do. I haven't been so much in the last year. So yes, I've had I've sort of taken my own approach, I think, to life, and been very fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of, transact a lot of business, create a lot of businesses, create a lot of value for myself and for others, whilst actually being able to go on my adventures. I used to go off to one of my homes is in Morocco,
Yeah.
And I'd been going there for 20, 30 years. And, I used to I remember you used to be staying in hotels, kind of doing deals where I had thermal fax paper, which would basically, I'd have to sign it and then try and persuade some Arab guy to sort of feed it
Fax
back
it off.
fax it back to them, back to London so I could complete a deal, but it was. I've enjoyed that aspect. I've enjoyed that aspect of doing things differently.
Do you think, because you've managed to travel quite a lot, and I know you go off and do, you've done a lot of your adventure stuff and things like that we've sort of touched on. Did you find that was a time for you to like think about business? Because a lot of people say there's a lot of stuff that you'll read nowadays, which is, just working, working, working. You need to set some time aside in your day or in your, points to say, I need to actually just think instead of just do. Do you think when you go away, is that your time to, like, your thinking time?
Running has helped, in
Yeah.
particular, because that gives me. So I run long distances on my races, which means I have to train a lot, and by nature, it's kind of tends to be at a pace that I can think, and it actually feels like meditation. So
Mm.
that has definitely helped. But having that freedom, having that type of mindset, that kind of even before that with traveling, yes, I had lots of time to think, to make sure that I was focused on the right things. And as I say, I've always felt I've always found it easy to make money.
Mm.
That's never been the real challenge. I never really thought about business necessarily,
Mm.
creating companies and developing teams and being responsible until 2017, really, when I
Mm.
chose to sort of chose that new adventure.
Mm.
And I'm glad that I didn't take it too seriously before that,
Yeah.
because I don't think I would have had quite the same life as I
Yeah.
have.
Because Bill Gates famously, doesn't he? I don't know if you've read this before, but he has something called Think Week, where he just takes himself away and just sits there, reads, and comes up with ideas and stuff like that. So it kind of sounds like when you run, I take it you don't listen to music.
I
You
do
don't
listen to
listen.
music.
Do you sometimes? Yeah.
Yeah, I listen to music. Yeah, kind of. But I think Bill Gates he's thinking all the time.
Yeah. Of
I
course. But
mean,
yeah.
probably my greatest sort of mentor that I've never met is Warren Buffett. And you listen to him; he doesn't have a computer
Mm.
in an office, and he spends a lot of time thinking. I think it's important.
When you're it's selfishly for myself, like, you've got a lot of things to do throughout the day, and sometimes you might feel guilt, just be very transparent, like you'd feel guilty for sitting there reading. And I know exactly what you're saying with Warren Buffett, I think he reads for like 70-80% of his day, doesn't he? Then actually, and do you think that's a mindset thing, isn't it, to say to yourself, I'm going to to educate myself and not just do all the time, and actually allow myself to think and learn and stuff like that.
I think it takes confidence
Mm.
to be able to kind of go, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're following the right plan. If you're really really busy following the wrong plan, you're not going to get to where you really want to go.
Mm.
And that's why it comes back to this long-term focus again.
Yeah.
Thinking about the long-term, not all revenue is the same. A
Mm.
large proportion of our group's revenue is basically on what I would call subscription or annuity-based income.
Yeah. Yeah.
And developing that type of revenue based on developing products that will kind of keep long-term customers,
Mm.
that takes thought. Sure, I could sort of, if I was, I could come up with ways of finding quick money if we wanted to, but then we would run the risk of basically putting revenue before reputation.
Yeah.
So spending plenty of time thinking about what reputation you want to create, I think, is really important.
Do you think you should know that before you start? Before you decide to become a leader, you should know. You should have decided. Okay. Well, I suppose it comes back to morals, doesn't it, as well, and what you want from life.
Look, I think ultimately we've all got to realise that there's consequences to all of our actions. It took some big mistakes in my life to basically really appreciate that, yeah, there are serious consequences and life is kind of real. If you're a leader, basically your choices have a big impact on other people.
Yeah.
So you need to be thinking about those consequences and be thinking about, the effect that you have. And ultimately, basically focusing one of the you need to focus on the customer really. If you focus on basically delivering real value, then you're not ever really going to have to worry about money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How would you look at the last? Obviously, Richard, we're now 2021. We are a day after they've just started to open up the country. People are now able to enjoy a beer in a beer garden and do some things with their families and stuff. So things have changed. But the last year, last 13 months, no doubt has been very, very difficult for a lot of people in business and their personal lives. It's been a lot of challenges for people. How do you look back on the last year? Now we're starting to hopefully come back to some normality. Did you see it has it been one of the biggest challenges of your career, would you say?
Yeah, there was definitely a point where in March last year, it's the 23rd of April when we first went into lockdown. I'd seen, the implications of what was coming for a few weeks, and I'd basically been working on the team, making sure that we kind of really try to understand. But March 23 was when I basically hit the button, which basically said, right, we're not going to focus on recruiting any new business. We're just going to focus on our existing customers and supporting that. And we were already on we don't normally do cash flow forecasts basically within our business. We don't tend to need to because of the annuity type of income that we created. But yeah, within those 2 weeks, we're already up to, I think, version 21 of our cash flow forecast.
Yeah.
And that was a difficult time. I remember thinking to myself, okay, so this today, when we went into a special board meeting on that morning, this is one of those days that a CEO just hopes never actually happens, when there's a seismic event that's actually could be extinction. And I think everyone felt the same at that time, to one degree or another. And the last year fundamentally has been, yes, a huge challenge for everybody in so many different ways. We use the term that some people were on the pitch, some people were off the pitch, so we furloughed a few people basically, especially in our sort of sales and marketing function, because we downed tools on that. And they were sort of struggling in certain ways, because obviously they couldn't do anything. And then the guys that were on the pitch, basically, who had to service all our existing customers, they were working
Loads to do. Yeah.
crazy kind of times.
Yeah.
And so everyone had it tough. I think having come from, I think my sporting background has definitely helped, because I looked at this and went, okay, this is going to be tough. But I knew I had a lot of personal resources.
Yeah.
And that I knew had a lot of sort of strength there that I'd proven to myself. And I saw this year as actually, for me personally and the organisation, as a training exercise fundamentally. It was a test. and I'd like to think that pretty much we scored well. I would give our team, an A.
That's awesome. No,
Yeah.
that's really, really good, isn't it? Because it has been tough for people. In your businesses, you sort of see different property businesses and media businesses as we touched on. Was there any particular areas of your business, given what the pandemic kind of highlighted, that you were particularly concerned about?
Yeah, so our investment business in the 4 years prior to coronavirus had grown 400%.
Yeah.
And we were just at the point, just as coronavirus hit, just on the process of restructuring our debt book.
Yeah.
And so that was probably the biggest challenge over the last year. We had two key banks that we had to kind of keep happy.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was hard work because obviously we had to go through a sort of valuation process, and valuers were like, how do we value things right now? Right?
Yeah.
And that was definitely the restructuring our debt book was during the last 12 months has been the hardest work. Sort of it's never that easy these days kind of to sort of to do these things, but fundamentally it was a lot harder in the last 12 months. But, we got it done. It's all good. And actually, there were lots of people challenges, fundamentally, because we service an awful lot of customers.
Yeah.
And partners. We've got a lot of people, and some people were coping better than others. So I think, the bank restructure and prioritizing people, basically, and triaging various customer needs. That was probably, and our staff. The team held up amazingly well despite all the challenges. But yeah. So basically, people and banks. They were the two.
They were the two.
Yeah.
So have you seen? So now, since you kind of got through probably the hardest patch, have you sensed that there's been a lot of opportunity as well, with the fact that there's been this huge challenge over the last year? Have you allowed yourself to spot opportunities, or have you just been focused on let's get through this as a team and survive? Or I've got a sneaky suspicion, the type of character you are, that you were spotting opportunities, as always happens when there's challenges or crisis going on.
Yeah, but it comes back to this sort of focus, this short-term, medium-term, and long-term focus, and why it's so important is our long-term plan hasn't changed. This was just, and it was really, really useful. It was just felt like with a proper long-term plan, we felt like basically it was these rough seas. We had context.
Yeah.
And that there was definitely a sort of sense like, look, this is just a short blip in the 100 years,
Absolutely. Yeah.
But likewise there have definitely been opportunities that we can see. But we saw opportunities in, for example, in retail before coronavirus came along. They've just been exacerbated by coronavirus. But there's much bigger disruptions from a business perspective than coronavirus, really, in the longer term, and the not least of which is technology. So basically the simple answer is, it hasn't really changed us fundamentally. We still didn't change our principles. It didn't change our kind of our core belief and our values and everything. We see some opportunities, but I say we saw those long-term opportunities anyway.
How do you think, talking about what you said a bit about retail, obviously lots of people, everyone listening to this, watching this, will go to their high street and it will probably look a lot differently than what it did 18 months ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago. There'll be a lot of businesses which won't reopen after the pandemic, the high street was, I think, anyone who's working in property will realize that the high street was in a pretty hard place, a tough place before the pandemic. And now it's, really accelerated that, hasn't it? What do you think the future of the kind of retail is and the high street? Because something that is very interesting to me personally.
Okay, so my take on it, and as I say, this is my take before coronavirus. We did some videos for educational videos for some of our programs before anyone even heard of COVID-19. And basically, I see the shift from retail is predominantly caused by the internet, Amazon, etc. Apart from a few isolated locations, for example, market towns like Salisbury, which we've got retail. We don't. The only place we actually own retail stock at the moment is in Salisbury, thankfully.
Okay.
And Salisbury, despite being affected by like everything else, it's actually held up extremely well. The opportunities, I think, in retail is basically a shift from office to retail.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the office blocks have going to move to residential. People are going to shift from their office working in office buildings and shift it into retail sites. I think that's where the logical place for it to go. The main reason for that, the main reason for that is fundamentally for the first time. Predominantly, I'm generalising here, that the value of a shop per square foot is lower now than the cost of office stock per square foot.
So just, yeah.
Retail was so valuable for so long, throughout the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way up until basically about 3-4 years ago, that it would not make sense to basically move an office into a high street shop location, because you could get a lot more rent and your value would be much greater, your yield value and your rent per square foot, depending upon the size of the zone A and stuff like that. Obviously it gets quite technical when you start looking at kind of valuations of retail sites, and you've really got to kind of think about them in terms of prime, secondary and tertiary, because they all have different stories. But fundamentally, on a price per square foot basis, the value of offices have gone up for a number of different reasons. Partly supply led, because supply is reduced, but also demand led too. So the price of offices have gone up, and the price of retail has come down, and those two have transected at a point where it is now cheaper to buy retail than it is offices. And of course, with the new E-Class, the government's made it very easy to convert retail stock into
Residential.
Offices. Residential, but the trouble is a lot of shops don't convert into residential, because it's only got one most of them only have one window, which is a shop.
I know. That's the challenge, isn't it? Because I know. But do you think the work? So two things. So now that more people have worked from home, obviously over the last year, there's been a shift. Or do you think that shift will sustain? Because obviously lots of people have had to work from home. You read a lot of studies. Everyone seems to say the same thing. Most people want a hybrid working environment where they've got the flexibility to go in for a few days, work from home for a couple of days. That seems to be what most companies, that seems to be the more generalistic viewpoint. Do you think that will affect being able to have this much office space available, turning retail into office? Because you won't need that much office space potentially anymore. or do you
I think
think
it's
this
just
is?
shifted. Yeah, people
Yeah,
people need going to need offices, right? Kind of
yeah,
they. We've learned that now. There was a question beforehand. Oh, do we? Maybe we can work from home. Maybe
yeah,
technology is going to allow us to do that.
mm.
And it's been forced on us, and now we've got our answer. Right? We don't like it. We want to be with, but when by nature we are
Social
human beings.
animals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
social animals. This is. Um, it should be obvious to us, but it's really made it clear. So I love talking about all these sorts of things because we've got training programs as part of our business that we have we work with investors and help them basically define their long-term objectives and understand a lot of these kind of opportunities. And again, it comes back to this question of thinking. How much time do you spend thinking? On this sort of stuff, we spend a lot of time thinking. We spend a lot of time teaching this stuff as well. And I enjoy the teaching element. Fun enough, is one of the things that I enjoy the most. It doesn't pay well, but actually I enjoy being with people who have these and having these discussions. And I think that if you make the right there's some really obvious and awesome investment opportunities out there at the moment, and we can't buy them all ourselves. So we love helping investors basically go off and make the right choices,
yeah.
and then so I get to sort of indirectly invest in lots of cool stuff.
Definitely. No, it's incredibly interesting to see, and like you said, the definitely spot on about the working from home. I think everyone loved it for a couple of months, and then suddenly realised actually I quite like being around people. Where are all the people gone? Let's get back to work. So yeah, no, definitely, it's super interesting, that side of things. On the subject of failures, are you okay for time, Richard, as well? We're okay to keep going for a little bit longer?
Someone just came in a little while ago who was actually I'm supposed to be meeting sort of 10 minutes ago, but yeah, we got a bit more time.
Okay, no worries. On the failure, do you think failure is incredibly important to being a leader,
Um,
and how you handle that failure?
I think we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. I think we learn. So yes, and learning
Mm,
is critical.
mm,
So on the basis that when we get things right, we just think we're really smart, right? So we
yeah.
basically, and that's reinforcing, and we could have just been lucky.
Mm,
Uh, could have been something else that just helped us really. It deserves this success. Whereas our failures, we should always think about our failures. We should always dissect them and try and understand why we did it. And it was basically a failing in our thinking and our choices, and we've got to take that responsibility.
Lead, leading on to that, what's been looking back on your career, what has been your one biggest failure?
Wow. Okay.
And how did you learn from it? How have you learned
I
from it?
think probably the biggest thing was when I allowed myself to be swayed by other people's opinions when I knew that they were deep down, I knew they were wrong, and I went along with it. Yeah.
What forced you? Why did you go along with that at the time? Do you think, looking back?
It's a confidence thing. There's a lot of people out there who've got a lot of confidence and sort of kind of pretend that they know what they've got all the answers. And it's very easy for us all to kind of go, I'll go along with that because actually I don't have to make the difficult decision. And it's not about arrogance as well. It's basically being able to listen to that inner voice and sort of know whether you are you're consistent with your values.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, makes sense.
I think that's probably the most important thing. Ray Dalio wrote a book, and Ray Dalio is a very interesting character, and he wrote a book called Principles, and that helped me sort of create almost a rule book for myself, basically. And I think following those rules, I think, is important. And you only create those rules through feedback. And again, the failure feedback is much greater than the positive feedback.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Really interesting. If you could I'll be wrapping up soon. If you could step into my shoes, okay, what would you have asked yourself that I didn't? Is there any questions that you would have asked, if you were me, that you would have asked yourself that I didn't ask you?
No, I think you've done a good. I think you've done a good job, Tim. The I think the defining of what's of our values is probably the thing that we should spend most time on, and creating these rules. So we have rules within all of our businesses. So we have a rule in our investment business, which is really quite simple. Well, in the Bourne, we have a business called Bourne Asset Management and Bourne Space, which is our Bournemouth. This is the part of the capital division in our business, and in there we had a three point core investment strategy, we call it.
Yeah.
And that's basically income, growth, location, fundamentally.
Yeah.
And those three rules are really, really useful. So creating some of those rules for yourself, whether it's an investment strategy or whether it's principles or narrowing down your core belief and your values, which gives you some boundaries, which helps you on a daily basis to make some decisions.
Yeah.
So, and again, the core investment strategy, those things are not multiple choice. They are literally, it's got to hit an income requirement. It's got to actually have hit a level
growth
potential, and it's got to be an awesome location. And actually, if it got two and not only two out of the three, it's an instant no. That really helps. That's helped us more than anything, really sort of make the right decisions. And that's borne out by, we've got an awesome portfolio because we haven't bought any duffers, things that, and ultimately, the avoidance of making mistakes, I think is something that we're always going to make mistakes, but ultimately having some set rules will actually, and the sooner we can learn some key rules, sensible rules, I think it will avoid us making some really horrendous mistakes.
Yeah, makes sense. Just wrapping it up, what are the three most important skills that you think, what are the three most important skills someone would need to master to be successful if we look at property, for example? What do you think the three most successful important skills are? Okay,
so it depends how you define success. Okay, I would define success as a long-term success.
Yeah.
I was very successful in the 90s, and because I would buy something in the morning and sell it in the afternoon, make 50 grand, and that when you're 27, 28,
feels like success.
That feels like success.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't, and it was confirmation bias, right? Kind of the 50 grand in my account basically told me I was really smart, and actually, but I realised that if I'd kept a lot of those assets, the core ones, basically, that would be success to me now. So defining success is fundamental. Okay,
yeah.
So basically, for me, I think it's about creating some structure to be successful long term. Okay, is about creating some structure, which comes back to some of these rules. Really focusing on kind of a time-based approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think is really important.
So the short, medium, and the long term.
A time-based approach, kind of perspective, I think is really is important. So having day-to-day kind of rules, thinking very much long term, and thinking about creating relationships. Okay.
Yeah.
fundamentally, if you can create really strong relationships of trust is the most valuable currency on the planet. And I didn't always realize that. I didn't always appreciate it the way I do now. But actually, kind of, out of all the relationships, you can't have a fantastic relationship without trust. And in business, fundamentally, if you can create some very trusting relationships with people that you can work with, those basically means you're going to have lots and lots of great business long term. It becomes really, really efficient. It becomes much more enjoyable. It's a complete game changer. So focus on the trust elements of relationships.
That's great. So is there anywhere, Richard, that for any of your organisations or for you personally, if someone wants to reach out to you online, are you on any of the social channels that you would like to share with us, or for the core company?
You could email me. Basically, it's probably the best. I don't tend to do social media, because we've got quite a few different businesses. If people want to learn about more about what we do, some of our educational programs, in particular about commercial property, we're very interested in talking to people who want to become a commercial property investor. And commercial property is a lot more challenging than residential. I like to say that commercial property is like playing chess, as opposed to residential is like drafts. And you need to get properly educated so you can de-risk it. We love talking to investors about commercial property, and we've got some various programs on that. I'm a really big believer in people who've built businesses. If they're paying rent, basically, they should really think about buying. And we've also got programs there, and fundamentally, we love seeing people change their lives. And all of our educational packages, they're all about basically helping people change lives. That is our real currency. If it doesn't change lives, it's one of our rules. It's one of our guiding principles. If it doesn't change lives, we're just not interested. So if people want to reach out and find out how we could basically work together, then please send me an email. My name is Richard at Bourne, BOURNE, asset.com. Bourne Asset. Richard at bourneasset.com. It'd be great to hear from people.
Thank you so much for your time, Richard. I appreciate it. Thanks for everything you've done for us today. And we'll speak soon. Okay?
Brilliant. Thanks.
Cheers.